Before you were loud enough to announce yourself, heaven was already calling your name. Not every soul gets fought over. Not every life becomes a battlefield of desire, but yours did. And somewhere in the quiet between the chaos of those who want you and those who need you, one voice rose above all the noise and whispered with certainty, "You are the one." And the world shifted. Today I want to take you on a journey into the miracle of being chosen, of being seen, of being worth the fight. Because the path to your miracle begins the moment you believe you were always worth fighting for. Before you were loud enough to announce yourself, before you ever walked into a room and turned heads, before you ever spoke a word that made someone stop and listen, you were already being fought over. Asterisk, asterisk. There is something deeply sacred about a soul that others cannot ignore. Something about the way certain people are made that causes the world around them to take sides, to argue, to reach, to compete. And most of the time, the person at the center of it all has no idea it is even happening. They are simply living, simply breathing, simply being. And yet, something about their existence alone is enough to stir something in the hearts of others that cannot be explained by logic or reason. You were that person. You are that person. Long before anyone sat across from you and said the words out loud, long before anyone admitted what they felt or confessed what they saw in you, the fight had already begun. It started in silence, in stolen glances, in the way someone would linger a little longer just to be near you, in the way your name would come up in conversations you were never part of, in the way people who had never even properly met you somehow already had an opinion about you, because something about you had already reached them before you ever arrived. That is not ordinary. That is not something that happens to everyone. That is the signature of a soul that carries weight, that carries light, that carries something so rare and so real that the world cannot help but respond to it. And here is what you need to understand. What you need to sit with and let sink all the way down into the deepest part of who you are. You did not earn this. You did not perform your way into being worth fighting over. You did not wake up one morning and decide to become valuable. This was never about what you did. It was always about what you are. It was always about the irreplaceable, undeniable, uncontainable essence that you were born carrying. People fight over things that matter. People fight over things they are afraid to lose. People fight over things they recognize as rare, things they know, deep in their gut, they will not find again if they let go. And when someone fights over you, what they are really saying, even if they never find the words for it, is that you are the kind of rare they have never encountered before. You are the kind of presence that makes them realize everything else they ever settled for was just practice for recognizing something real. But here is the part that breaks so many people. Here is the part that causes so much unnecessary pain. Most people who are worth fighting for spend years not believing it. They spend years shrinking, years apologizing for taking up space, years convincing themselves that the intensity of other people's reactions toward them must be a misunderstanding. They look at the evidence of their own worth and find reasons to dismiss it. They watch people go to extraordinary lengths for them and tell themselves it must be about something else. It must be circumstance. It must be timing. It must be anything other than the simple, powerful truth that they are genuinely, undeniably, irreversibly someone worth fighting for. And that disbelief, that quiet, stubborn refusal to accept their own value, is the only thing that ever truly held them back. Not the people who doubted them. Not the circumstances that tried to diminish them. Not the seasons of life that were hard and cold and relentless. The only real obstacle was the war they waged against their own worth inside the privacy of their own mind. Because the truth is, you were worth fighting for on the day you were born. You were worth choosing before you ever gave anyone a reason to choose you. You were worth loving before you ever learned how to perform love in a way that made others comfortable. Your value was never contingent on their recognition of it. It existed before they saw it. It existed before you saw it. It was written into the very fabric of who you are, placed there by something far greater than human opinion, human preference, or human approval. And no amount of being overlooked, underestimated, or walked away from has ever changed that. not once, not even for a moment. Asterisk, asterisk. There are moments in life that feel too perfectly timed to be accidental, moments where the right person appears at exactly the right crossroads, where a single conversation changes the entire direction of your story, where something clicks into place so precisely that even the most logical mind pauses and whispers, "This was not random." Asterisk. Asterisk, being chosen is one of those moments. Not the shallow kind of chosen. Not the kind where someone picks you because you were convenient, because you were available, because you happened to be standing in the right place at the right time. That is not being chosen. That is being selected by default. And there is a world of difference between the two. True choosing, the kind that changes lives, the kind that echoes through years, the kind that people look back on decades later and still feel the weight of. That kind of choosing is never accidental. It is never casual. It is never something that could have gone either way without consequence. When someone truly chooses you, something in them shifts permanently. Something that was searching stops searching. Something that was restless finds its stillness. And that is not something they manufactured. That is not something they decided intellectually after weighing pros and cons on a list. That is something that happened to them, something that moved through them, like a current they did not choose to feel, but could not deny once they felt it. That is the miracle of being chosen. And miracles, by their very nature, do not operate on human schedules. They do not arrive when we have prepared for them, when we feel ready, when we have done enough self-work and healed enough wounds and become enough of the person we think we are supposed to be before good things are allowed to find us. Miracles arrive in their own time. They move according to a logic that is deeper than our understanding, guided by something that sees the full picture when we are only ever seeing a single frame. This is why so many people miss the miracle when it is standing right in front of them, because they are waiting for it to look a certain way. They have built such a specific image in their minds of what being chosen should feel like, what it should arrive wrapped in, what circumstances should surround it, that when the real thing appears, sometimes quieter than expected, sometimes more ordinary on the surface than they imagined, they almost walk past it. They almost let it go because it did not match the version they rehearsed in their head. But the miracle does not need your permission to be real. It does not need you to recognize it immediately in order to be valid. It was always real. It was always moving toward you. And the moment it arrived was not determined by luck or chance or the random collision of two lives in an indifferent universe. It was determined by something far more intentional than that. Think about every path that had to bend in a specific direction. Every decision, yours and theirs, that had to fall a certain way. Every moment that could have gone differently but did not. Every door that closed. Every detour that felt like punishment at the time. Every delay that felt like abandonment. All of it, was quietly arranging itself into the exact configuration needed to bring two specific souls into contact at exactly the right moment. That is not coincidence. That does not happen by accident. The mathematics of that kind of precision belong to something far beyond human orchestration. You were not stumbled upon. You were arrived at. There is a difference. Being stumbled upon is passive. It implies that your presence in someone's life was a byproduct of their movement, something they tripped over without intention. Being arrived at means you were the destination. It means that even when the person moving toward you did not fully understand why they kept taking the turns they were taking, something in them knew. Something deeper than conscious thought was navigating toward you with a certainty that their mind had not yet caught up to. And that knowing, that pull, that quiet and persistent gravity that drew someone toward you, despite every reason they might have had to go a different direction, that is the fingerprint of the miraculous on your story. Being chosen is never just about the person who chose you. It is about the invisible architecture that made the choosing possible. It is about the unseen hands that held the pieces of two lives in careful suspension until the precise moment when everything was ready. It is about the kind of love that does not originate in human decision alone, but feels, from the very first moment, like something that was always meant to be completed. Asterisk, asterisk. There is a kind of love that does not flinch. A kind that does not pack its bags the moment things get complicated, does not grow cold when the season changes, does not quietly calculate whether staying is still worth it. It is a love that has already decided, long before the storms arrived, long before the imperfections became visible, long before the shine of newness wore off and the real, unpolished, unperformed version of you stepped forward, that you are not something to be released. And when you find that kind of love, when you are standing inside it, you will know it, not because of grand gestures or poetic declarations, but because of something far quieter and far more powerful than either of those things. You will know it because no matter how many times the world offered that person a reason to let go, they did not let go. No matter how many exits appeared, they did not take them. No matter how loud the voices became that suggested something easier was available somewhere else, they stayed, not out of obligation, not out of fear, but because something in them recognized something in you that they were simply not willing to walk away from. That recognition is not taught. It cannot be performed or faked for any meaningful length of time. It is either there or it is not. And when it is there, when someone looks at you and sees not just who you are in your best moments, but who you are in your most unguarded, most vulnerable, most honest moments, and still chooses not to move, that is one of the rarest things that exists in this world. Most people have experienced being loved conditionally, being loved for what they produce, for how they make others feel, for the version of themselves they present when they are trying. That kind of love is exhausting because it requires constant maintenance. It demands that you never fully rest, never fully arrive, never fully set down the performance, because the moment you do, the love begins to shift. And somewhere deep inside, you always feel the fragility of it. You always sense that you are one bad day, one wrong word, one moment of genuine humanness away from losing it. But the one who sees your value truly sees it. Not the curated version, but the complete version, does not love you like that. Their love does not have that fragile quality. It does not tremble every time you show up as less than perfect. It does not require you to earn it back every morning. It is not positioned just above your head, always slightly out of reach, always requiring you to stretch a little higher to maintain contact with it. It is simply there, present in a way that does not announce itself loudly, but makes itself known through the steady, unwavering reality of its existence. And that steadiness, that refusal to be moved by every wind that blows through, is what makes it so transformative. Because when you live inside that kind of love long enough, something in you begins to change. The parts of you that were always braced for abandonment begin to slowly, carefully unknot themselves. The walls that took years to build begin to find less reason to stand. The version of you that was always waiting for the other shoe to drop begins to realize, slowly and then all at once, that there is no other shoe, that this is real, that this person is not going anywhere, and that you do not have to keep performing or proving or protecting yourself from someone who never intended to hurt you in the first place. This is what it means to be truly seen. Not just looked at, not just admired from a distance for the parts of yourself you chose to display, but seen all the way through into the complicated and the contradictory and the unfinished, and held anyway, wanted anyway, chosen anyway. There is a reason people who experience this kind of love describe it as life-changing, not because the other person completed them in some romantic fairy tale sense, but because being genuinely seen by another human being does something to the way you see yourself. When someone refuses to let go of you, when someone consistently chooses your presence over the convenience of your absence, it becomes increasingly difficult to maintain the belief that you are not worth holding on to. And the one who sees your value will never allow you to forget, through their actions, through their consistency, through the quiet but unshakable reality of their continued presence, that you were never something to be easily released, that walking away from you was never a simple option. That whatever the world may have told you about your worth, their refusal to let go tells a completely different and far more truthful story. Asterisk, asterisk. There is something that happens to a person when they spend too long in rooms where their value was never acknowledged. Something quiet and corrosive that settles into the way they carry themselves, the way they speak about themselves, the way they shrink before anyone even asks them to. They begin to internalize the silence of those who never celebrated them as evidence that there was nothing worth celebrating. They begin to mistake the blindness of others for a reflection of their own reality. But here is what that person never fully understood, what they were never told clearly enough, loudly enough, or consistently enough to actually believe. The failure to be seen was never a verdict on their worth. It was always, only ever, a verdict on the limitations of the ones who were looking. Your worth was never up for debate. It was never a question that needed answering, never a case that needed arguing, never a proposition that required the approval of a room full of people before it could be declared true. It existed before the debate began. It existed before anyone opened their mouth to question it. And it continued to exist, completely intact, through every moment that someone chose not to recognize it. This is the thing about worth, real worth. The kind that is woven into who you are, rather than built from what you do. It does not fluctuate based on audience. It does not rise when people applaud and fall when the room goes quiet. It does not expand in the presence of admiration and contract, in the presence of neglect. It remains constant, unmoved, indifferent to the opinions being formed about it in the minds of people who were never equipped to measure it correctly in the first place. Think about every person who ever underestimated you, every room that overlooked you, every opportunity that went to someone else, not because you were less deserving, but because the person making the decision did not have the discernment to recognize what was standing in front of them. Think about every relationship where you gave everything and received almost nothing in return, not because you were not enough, but because the person receiving was not capable of properly valuing what they had been given. Think about every time you were passed over, dismissed, minimized, or made to feel like an afterthought. None of that changed your worth, not a single instance of it, not even slightly. What it changed was your perception of your worth, and that is an entirely different thing. Perception is shaped by experience, by repetition, by the accumulation of moments where the message received was that you were less than. And when that message comes often enough, from enough sources, over enough time, the mind begins to accept it not as a perspective but as a fact. It begins to file it under truth rather than under opinion. And once it is filed there, it starts to color everything. The way you enter rooms, the way you receive compliments, the way you respond to people who genuinely want to love you well, the way you unconsciously position yourself just below the level where you actually belong. But opinions dressed in the clothing of facts are still just opinions. And the opinions of people who could not see you clearly were always filtered through the scratched and distorted lens of their own unhealed places, their own insecurities, their own inability to sit comfortably in the presence of something they did not fully understand. Their assessment of you was never objective, it was always personal. It was always more about what they were carrying than about what you were lacking. The ones who doubted you were not authorities on your value. They were simply people with limited vision, making assessments beyond the boundaries of what they were actually capable of seeing. And to allow their limited vision to become the defining story of your worth is to hand the pen of your narrative to someone who was never qualified to write it. Because worth does not require consensus. It does not need a majority vote. It does not become more real when more people acknowledge it, or less real when the room falls silent. It simply is. Rooted, established, present in you before anyone arrived to confirm it, and fully intact, long after those who denied it have moved on. The debate was never about whether you had value. It was always only about whether the people around you had the eyes to see it, and eyes that cannot see the sun do not diminish the sun. They only reveal the limitation of their own sight. And so, if this message reached something deep inside you today, if even one word landed in a place that needed it, do not let it stop here. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded of their worth, someone who has forgotten they were always worth fighting for, someone who needs to hear that being chosen is never an accident. Drop a comment below and tell me which keynote hit you the hardest, because your story matters, your presence matters. And if this moved you, let it move through you into someone else's life. Like, comment, share, and never stop walking your miracle path.